All right. If I have everything correct, we are live. Snake, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
You sound crystal clear. Well, Sheikydeeky Podcast is here. I am your host, Sheikydeeky. We have Venom Snake. Thank you, Snake, for joining us today. And
Pleasure to be here.
we're just gonna chat like we always do. So first order of business. Let's take all these fucking internet connected devices, throw them in the garbage. That'll save the planet. Anyone disagree? I'm sure there's plenty of people who disagree.
Disagree, not per se, but maybe disagree in general concept, but I think people would be a lot healthier without the devices, for sure.
How do you like, it's like, I kind of almost have become ironically obsessed with that kind of content about the destruction of like our minds and society with the content. So it's like watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix is like cognitive dissonance. Playing Metal Gear Solid and them talking about the same thing 20 years ago. It's like the metaphor that always resolves it for me is you got to plug in to unplug, but it's very it is a very strange thought to have, to be like everybody's using their stuff and everyone kind of knows there's a problem there, but we just keep using it. Like, how often do you go outside and not see like tons of people on their phone anymore?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that the fact that we're so in tune with the devices is making us out of tune with reality, and you see the effect of that on young kids who've never really been in reality, like away from a screen for any length of time. They're different. Like they can't socialize. They're awkward. They're weird.
Yeah, it's a giant. It's not all of them. You know, I was just talking with one of my coworkers today. She's 20, and in her case, I would say she's a little different. She has a voice. She's bold. She's really bold, actually, in some way. But in another way, most of them, I've had a lot of people on the internet talk about how my age is, and they say they're jealous in some way of the world that we grew up in. That we actually grew up in the real world on some level.
Yeah. I mean, I think that jealousy is merited because if you see the footage, like there was this one viral video that was going around of like people in the 80s, and it was just like a bunch of strangers in like a 7-Eleven, but they were all having like a really good time. It was like back when the title was something like back when people knew how to socialize, and it was. I think that people are aware that there's something that they lost that they just don't have anymore.
They talk about this a little bit in what's it called? Things like 1984 and other dystopians, that the human spirit never really dies. We can be controlled, we can be manipulated, they could try to reach the bottom of the brain stem, as some people like to call it in the social dilemma type space, but you can never really destroy a human and make him fully robotic per se. I guess you could look at it from a perspective of the metaphysical on some level, that there's always something about us that's still exists on a certain level as a human, no matter how controlled we might feel like we are.
Yeah, I mean, like you can call that a soul, and I think a lot of people in quantum physics and neurology say things like that there's quantum interaction with our neurons, and that's what there's inherent unpredictability in our thoughts because of that. So I mean, there might be something to that. It's really hard to tell for sure, but yeah, I mean,
do you feel like you relate to your soul, so to speak? That's hard to say, soul, so to speak.
It's hard. It's a new concept for me to have to wrestle with. But like, I would say, yeah, it's kind of one of those things where, I mean, obviously, as you know, I was learning Judaism, and that helped me. I think that what the feeling that I describe to people, it's like, have you ever seen those sponge dinosaurs that you stick them in water and then they like get bigger?
Maybe.
There's
I'm
like a
such
toy that does that, or like basically, I felt like my flesh was getting like nourished as I was doing that, as I was learning, and which was an effect that I didn't think I. It wasn't something I felt like I needed, so it made me start being much more open to these metaphysical concepts, like of a soul and afterlife and all these other things.
Do you believe that when our earth body's done, that whatever our soul is perceived to be continues on?
I don't know where I stand with that. Like the Jewish perspective is that you kind of return to God and you live in essentially what is heaven and study the Torah all day. Like that's basically all you do. At least that's how I understand it. So if I do believe my religion, so I think I have to incorporate that concept into my mind somehow. But right now it's not incorporated. I kind of have no opinion on it. No opinion of my own.
I mean, it's like I always say this about reality. You know, we're very math based. It's a very mathematical perspective that God or the Big Bang source of existence is what's successfully divided by zero. In mathematics, you can't divide by zero. Some people try to say that's undefined, but if you think of it logically, it's like I got 10 people and I'm going to divide 0 apples amongst them. And how many apples do I have? It's like you could say zero, but here we are. Like, it's impossible for us to exist from what we understand about reality. Yet I'm talking to you. And people try to say my truth versus your truth. And, how do you know that you exist? How do you know 2 + 2 = 4? And it's just, there's a certain perspective with that kind of response where it's like, yes, at the end of the day, everything has a faith, that everything we believe, everything we know to be true is still based on a belief system. If we live in the matrix, then our need for oxygen and water is just software code, and that can be changed anytime. But um, I often feel like future thoughts about, let's say, an afterlife, past thoughts about a source life, really kind of distract us from life now, today, and what we're supposed to do today, regardless of where our destination or origins are. You know, so many people in today's world are very either upset or get very political, very emotional about the past, their past ancestors, their past atrocities, the past sufferings. Um, you know, there are ancestors, and we spend so much time in today's world focusing on our ancestors. We fail to recognize that one way or the other, we're all going to be dead, and we're going to be the future ancestors, the ancestors of the future. And it's often, what legacy do we want to leave? And a lot of our society right now is very focused on, that you say you live in the moment, but do you really live in the moment, or are you escaping from the moment and focused on your past positivities, past negativities, or distant past, ancestor past? Are you stuck in an anxiety state, which is a future driven thought? It's all about the future. It's like we don't even live in the moment anymore. We escape the moment. That almost every moment is about the moment, avoiding the moment.
Yeah.
And I'm a believer in, you should reserve moments of today for tomorrow. Oh, what if people who have the opposite perspective of what I'm saying is, oh, you got to live in the moment. It's like, sure, the moment's all we know is true, as far as we feel, but are you really going to rely on a bus hitting you tomorrow,
Mhm.
or are you going to assume that you will be here in 10 years, and that maybe, like, as I obsess about people's diets and how I've lost my weight and fixed my mind, that I'm not saying I'm really good with this, but loving future Sammy is more important on sometimes than worrying about present Sammy, if that makes sense. And in some ways, that's probably the answer to love present Sammy, is to love future Sammy.
Yeah, I think that by the time that you become future Sammy that you're trying to love, like you will feel the love of yourself. Because that happens to me. Like when I've done things for myself in the future, like you find $20 in your pocket that you weren't expecting, you're like, oh fuck yeah. Like thanks, Pat Abraham, for forgetting it here. There's some kind of like gratitude towards yourself, even if it's a slightly abstracted.
It's probably not something we're wired for as humans, as a base. I think survival has always been the name of the game, even in a religious context.
Yeah, I could say I would agree.
And we're starting this talking. I make my. I'm not joking when I, you know, have my issues with like the smartphone era and the social media era tied to smartphones, um, but I think my usage of smartphones is so much that I forgot what I was about to say.
Um,
um, hmm, brain fart. No marijuana today. I haven't smoked in like 2 months.
well, the technology has been running your brain.
Literally, there's literally that's one of the videos I wanted to watch with you at some point.
Yeah, we could do that now, don't you think?
I kind of wanted to do something similar first.
Oh wait, yeah. I think this one's not necessarily going live, so.
Oh, we're live, pal. Hey, we're
Well, I
live,
mean,
pal.
not live, but going. Are you? Did you say this one's not going up or something? Or
No, we're live on YouTube right now.
oh, okay.
Live
Do
on
we have
YouTube.
views?
What'd you say?
Do we have views? Is anybody watching?
I mean, we just started, so um, let me see how I can figure that out.
Yeah, it's live now. We gotta go back.
I mean, the links they sent you are old, so let me just click on it and see. It's the first time trying something, so I wouldn't expect much to begin with, but like first day, but you never know. Now it just says one watching though.
That's probably just you because I just closed my tab.
Yeah, that's okay. So, analytics. Here we go.
The video that I'm on has ended, so maybe I'm not looking at the right one.
So let me send you the current one.
Well, if I go to your channel, it should let me see that you're live.
Yeah, go to
Just
the. Yeah, go for that.
okay, I have you here. Yeah, it says one watching now, but I guess that might be either you or me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but yeah, so anyways, you have this like obsession with technology and how it's destroying us. I get your perspective. I agree with it mostly, but I just think that every generation has had like its own thing that was an existential threat, and it's always in a different category of like threat. Like you had the world wars was their big thing back then. Then you had nuclear war, which is still the theme of war, but like it was different. In the 80s and maybe the 90s, and now we're having like this crisis of abundance and inconvenience, and then that's our current problem. Um,
Have you ever heard of a society in historical records that didn't collapse?
no, I don't think I have heard of that.
So, so the idea that it's sort of something we said earlier in our private conversation. You're right until you're right, and you're right until you're wrong.
Yeah.
Like this is an extreme example of, oh, raw dogging women's not a problem. I never got one pregnant until you do, and then you're wrong, kind of thing. And we've had all these quote unquote existential threats over the last 100 years. And why is this different? Well, let's see. Do you remember the 80s at all?
No, I was 9 months old when the 80s ended.
Okay. All right. Then, in that case, I am just going to play what I want to play and talk about it. Since you're Venom Snake, let's go with Raiden Snake for a minute. Hold on. I need to. I'll probably have to talk about this another time as well.
Yeah, we can do it again. I mean, after I watch it again, I'm sure I'm gonna have new thoughts.
I need to figure out. This is new, so let me figure out. There's a way to. Okay, so let me first. I'm going to watch somebody watching something, talking about something while we talk about it.
Excellent.
So it's going to be a little meta. I could just watch the scene itself, but I think I'm going to actually watch. Let me switch accounts on this so that there's no ads because I pay for YouTube Plus. Why? Because mommy likes to go to say, "Okay, Google, play some." Hey, I'm not really talking to you, bitch.
Hilarious.
Sometimes she could. You're a horrible bitch. Let's see what she says. She didn't say anything. So one time she's like, "Don't talk to me like that."
She forgets she's not your girlfriend.
Oh fuck. Oh god. What's his channel? Max Derrett. Forgive me, Max Derrett, if I'm going to comment on your video. Commenting on a video game. Okay. This is probably his most popular video, anyways. Okay. So let me first. So I'm going to play something. It's going to take me just a second to get it to work the way I want it to. And this is. The hell? What the hell? Hold on a second. Okay, Google. Stop on Google TV.
Okay, stop in Google TV.
Well, that was strange. She decided to play a Dr. Mike bodybuilding video on my television after I didn't say anything to her. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. That's pretty weird.
Okay. I mean, it was a video I was trying to watch earlier, but it was weird. Okay, so back to this. Where is this? I know there's a better way to do this, but all right. So he's gonna. This guy, the name is Max Derrett. This is one of the better explanations of the cutscene I always talk about at MGS2 that talks about the modern world. This is a very accurate description of the world we live in now on some level, I would say. And anytime you want me to pause it and comment, just let me know.
Okay.
See it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
He's just going to chat for 1 minute. A lot of people demonize video games and think it's just like Grand Theft Auto or whatever, but sometimes you can get much more emotional from playing a story or playing a movie than you can watching it, I would say.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I described them as modern operas because you're taking all the same kind of art. You have storytelling, visual, audio, acting. You have all these disciplines inside of a video game, and I'm like, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. When you have like those ingredients, you can create some pretty profound things. Like you can do that in a play, you can do that in a video game.
What a choice of words as we watch a video called The Most Profound Moment in Gaming History. All right, let's continue.
I can't hear this actually.
You can't hear the audio at all?
No.
You're just seeing the video?
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. Call this a beta test of a live stream.
Well, that's kind of the idea, I think.
You don't hear anything? Let me try it. Let me rewind it just a little.
Your output, whatever your output is, must not be connected to the input of the.
Well, I'm using the software we're using to connect to each other, and I'm doing share. Hold on. I think I know what it is. Hold on. I'm going to do it over. To share audio, share a tab or screen instead. Okay. That's why. All right. So I will start it over, if that's all right. Hold on. I did something that's going to screw up the audio. I'm going to fix that real quick. It's funny. I'm using something called Volume Booster, but not for boosting the volume, to be able to get a bigger screen on this. Okay.
For the past 4 years on
I hear it.
I have made videos on various topics, but by far the most popular form of video I have done centers on video game analysis. What I think made them so popular is that instead of being your usual video game review, I have focused primarily on narrative. Specifically, I have focused on what I believe are the best stories in the video game canon. For 20 odd years, video game narratives have been demonstrating a capacity to confuse, entice, and emotionally manipulate their audience in the most positive of ways. Most recently, in fact, I have been putting forth the argument that video game narratives have demonstrated such sufficient profundity that they sometimes have matched the greatest stories told in other mediums. To continue our collective celebration of our modern-day digital mythology, I would finally like to give full attention to a game which, I would argue, has the most profound moment in gaming history. I refer to the final codec conversation from Metal Gear Solid 2. While I have done several videos on Metal Gear Solid 2 in the past, I have never given full analytic attention to this specific moment. The main reason why is because somebody has already done so. My all-time favorite YouTube video is titled The Most Profound Moment in Gaming, MGS2 AI Conversation Analysis. Though it was released almost 9 years ago by its creator, Logo Steve, I pondered for a while how I might do a better job than he did. However, given our current cultural context, I believe I have a few other worthwhile things to contribute. The advent of subjects like fake news, the resurgence of rampant political correctness, and our tendency towards online tribalism has imbued this conversation with a much denser sense of meaning. To those who consider themselves gamers but have never played a Metal Gear Solid game, you are obligated to at least listen to this final conversation. Not only will you be enlightened by its philosophical commentary, but you will be terrified by its implications, as I have been for my entire life.
Now, he's going to give a little context because it's towards the end of the game. I want to give a little bit more. I'm actually playing this with my friend Rob. So, Rob, if you're watching, turn this off. Metal Gear Solid 1 came out in 1990, like late 98, I believe. Yep. I was playing in 99. And it was a phenom. It's considered the best PlayStation 1 game of all time. It was an interactive movie. I had many people that I played that watched it, and sold like 20 million copies at the time. It was comparing it to Mario. It was like mind blowing for its time.
Mm-hmm.
And in the build up for Metal Gear Solid 2, they had trailers. They had a lot. They had like a demo disc. I even ordered the demo disc. It was on a different game from Hideo Kojima called Zone of the Enders, just to play the demo. And long story short, you play the game. You start out in what's called the tanker chapter as what you think is Solid Snake, the hero from the first game, and he explains this a little bit. But effectively, as you're playing the game, all of a sudden there's a new character that pops up that you're controlling, and he says his name is Snake. And in the first game you have the Colonel Campbell is your like support, one of your support leaders, and you think that you're talking to Colonel Campbell the entire game, the second game, but it's off. His voice is a little off, his way of speaking is a little off. And as you're playing, you encounter Solid Snake. And I remember when it first happened, when Raiden showed his face, I was like, hey! And the entire time I'm playing the game and I'm saying, okay, when do I get to play as Snake? Okay, I see that Snake is there. Go away, Google. I'm not talking to you. But it never happens. And the trailers were falsely advertised. Like, there's literally cutscenes in the trailers that never appeared in the game. And this was on purpose. This was to make a point. The entire game, when you're playing, is a form of like cognitive dissonance. And effectively, he lied to us on purpose to make a point. And the point ends up being at the end of the game in this cutscene. Do you want to say anything or should I continue?
No, I'm listening to you.
Okay.
Raiden, are you receiving? We're still here.
How's that possible? The AI was destroyed.
Only GW.
Who are you?
To begin with, we're not what you'd call human.
You look lost.
Over the past 200 years, a kind of consciousness formed layer by layer in the crucible of the White House. It's not unlike the way life started in the oceans 4 billion years ago. The White House was our primordial soup, a base of evolution. We are formless. We are the very discipline and morality that Americans invoke so often. How can anyone hope to eliminate us? As long as this nation exists, so will we.
Up until the end of the game, the main character Raiden believed he was receiving orders from a man named Colonel Roy Campbell, a man who was also Solid Snake's commander throughout Metal Gear Solid 1. At the end of Metal Gear Solid 2, Raiden learned that his colonel was in fact an artificial intelligence, manipulating Raiden to perform its political bidding. The bidding in question refers to the AI's desire to control the human race by controlling the spread of information via the press and the internet, but we'll focus on that more in a moment. During the first part of this conversation, the audience learns how this AI came to be, and surprisingly, it is similar to the way human beings as a species came to be. Unlike the origin of human life in the oceans, the AI's quote-unquote life had its basis in American idealism, hence the AI's referencing of the White House as a symbol. In the mind of the AI, their purpose is to push forward American values, things like freedom, equality, and healthy competition. However, Raiden points out what should be an obvious contradiction in the AI's thought process, that the AI wants to take away those freedoms via censorship.
Cut the crap. If you're immortal, why would you take away individual freedoms and censor the net?
Jack, don't be silly.
Don't you know that our plans have your interests, not ours, in mind?
What?
Jack, listen carefully, like a good boy.
I want to just comment on something. The game was released in November of 2001, and they almost canceled it completely. And they had to
after it came out or before?
Before. So right before this happens, Hideo Kojima is a time traveler or something like that. So many of his games have made so many predictions that came true in some direct or indirect way. Towards the end of the game, before this scene, or like a little bit before this scene, the terrorists crashed their ship into downtown Manhattan. The game came out in November of 2001. There was a lot of it was censored, ironically, because this cutscene's talking about censorship, because they knew that it was going to be a lot of backlash for what they were trying to present, like burning American flags and things coming down. But there's literally a ship that crashes into downtown Manhattan. Apparently, there was supposed to be images of it crashing right into the Twin Towers and things like that. A game that's been worked on since the year 2000. So it's not like it's like he thought about just canceling the whole thing, but they convinced him to keep doing it. They just removed as much as they needed to not have it be so sensitive at that moment in time.
Is it November? So that was 2 months after the 9/11, right?
I think it was released on November 9th, 2001. I think it was like 2 months, like almost 2 months to the day. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And even in the first game, there's a conversation with the nuclear weapons specialist, Nastasha. And I was watching it not that long ago, and she's talking about effectively saying there might come a point where Russia feels cornered by NATO and have to start a war. That was in 1998.
Right.
It's like there's so much of that kind of stuff. It's a kind of nuts. But anyways.
about to argue for the ethics of controlling information, but they are going to do so in a very condescending manner. As we move on, I suggest that you, the listener, pay attention to how the AI demeans Raiden. Their pomposity is intrinsic to the effectiveness of their future argument.
The mapping of the human genome was completed early this century. As a result, the evolutionary log of the human race lay open to
What'd you
us.
say?
We
said that was
started with
accurate.
genetic engineering, and in the end, we succeeded in digitizing life itself.
But there are things not covered by genetic information.
What do you mean?
Human memories, ideas, culture, history.
Genes don't contain any record of human history.
Is it something that should not be passed on? Should that information be left at the mercy of nature?
We've always kept records of our lives, through words, pictures, symbols, from tablets to books.
But not all the information was inherited by later generations. A small percentage of the whole was selected and processed, then passed on. Not unlike genes, really.
That's what history is, Jack.
What the AI is trying to do here is illustrate how genes function similar to how memes function. If genes are, quote, a unit of heredity which is transferred from a parent to offspring and is held to determine some characteristic of the offspring, then a meme is something like an ethic, a fact, or an opinion that later generations inherit. Like genes, memes are also subject to a process called natural selection. If certain organisms are better adapted to their environment than others, then their genes are passed on to the next generation while others have the potential to die off. Similarly, if certain memes seemingly hold enough meaning or logic, then supposedly they survive better than memes that do not. What distinguishes memes from genes is the nature of the selection process. Genes are more or less subject to the amoral discretion of nature, but memes can be analyzed and weeded out via moral discretion. However, the AI will now illustrate how the natural selection of memes bears a unique problem in the internet age compared to the past few centuries.
But in the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness, never fading, always accessible.
Rumors about petty issues, misinterpretations, slander.
All this junk data, preserved in an unfiltered state, growing at an alarming rate.
It will only slow down social progress, reduce the rate of evolution.
Prior to the internet age, information was curated. We read about the news in newspapers, watched the news on TV, and it was all funneled to us after passing through a, hopefully, professional body. Granted, there was a greater potential for curators such as journalists, editors, and academics to manipulate information to fit their various political biases, but at least there was some form of selection process going on.
So prior to any of our lives, like in the 60s, 70s, you could say that was Walter Cronkite was his name. People watched their news from one source. And even in the 80s, we all had screens. We've had screens since, not all of us, but screens, I guess, since the 40s or 50s. But we'd watch the same screen together and we'd watch the same content together. So even if there was a risk for a higher, like he's saying, a higher bias and a higher filter, it was still the same information that we're all sharing. Even in the mid 2000s, like when people are watching The Office, for example, that's a fictional show. You'd have like the water cooler talk about The Office on Monday. Everyone had the very similar content. It's not like what they're about to describe going forward. Do you have any thoughts so far?
Not quite. I'm still processing what they're saying. There was a couple moments that I had something to say, but I think I just didn't speak up in time because I was listening too much.
And anytime you want me to pause it, just let me know. I'll pause it.
Okay.
In the age of the internet, however, information is released so fast that it is impossible to control the discussion. Instead of listening exclusively to reporters, we are left to our own devices to derive what is valuable. Except, unlike the curators in the pre-digital age, the general population does not know how to separate the wheat from the chaff. We will focus on small, trivial issues like a celebrity's love life, rather than macro issues, such as the cumulative monetary debt of the Western world. We will only listen to news sources that confirm our pre-existing political leanings and ignore any challenging voices. If it sounds like I'm engaging in apologetics for censorship, I am not. I would never censor information under any circumstances. But what does one do and respect to the destructive influence of human bias. The AI goes on to propose a solution.
Right. You seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context.
The AI argues that because they are not prone to human error and have inner CPUs with greater processing power than the human brain, they would know how to curate information and present it to the human race in a way that doesn't slow human evolution. Unlike your average political body, which might censor information that is inconvenient to their cause, the AI would simply present information in the most factual way possible so that political bias would not intervene, thus cooling political tensions across the political spectrum. Of course, if something like the AI censorship program came into place, ethical questions would arise regarding whether or not this compromises human freedom, specifically our quote-unquote free will.
So, being in like the diet nutrition space, for example, if you're a vegan and you're on the internet, your feed is always propagating vegan propaganda. If you're if you're a carnivore like I am at the moment, it's always going to bias you towards carnivore propaganda. And while you can sometimes have respectable conversations between the two, it's always an argument about I'm right and you're wrong, or I'm right and everyone else is an idiot. And, the conversation will explain this better as time goes on, as we watch it. But how do you know what truth is? I'm doing carnivore diet. How do I know that what they tell me isn't just being made up by random people? It's like, PewDiePie is the king, was not anymore, but he was the king of YouTube. He could say anything and it would influence, millions and millions, same as Joe Rogan. How do you know that their information is factual in a world where there's infinite truths?
Well, I mean, I think that there are infinite truths in the sense that like people have their own truth, but then there's also objective truths in that like you can't, like you were saying, like you can't have 1 + 1 is always going to equal 2, but that's through axiomatic mathematical definition. But
how are human beings supposed to know what that axiomatic objective truth is in the internet age where they're just being reinforced by their bias, and there's infinite biases?
Yeah, so like the people's ability to actually have access to this critical thinking, I think, is limited because you're getting feeds that, like you're saying, give you more of what you're already looking at. And so you hear the same story repeated to you a bunch of times, and then you start to believe it. And that's true no matter what the story is.
So let's continue, because they're going to expand on what you just said for sure.
Ideally, human beings should have the autonomy to make their own decisions, no matter what mistakes may follow. In response, the AI argues why the problems that arise from that freedom supposedly necessitate censorship.
The digital society furthers human flaws and selectively rewards development of convenient half-truths. Just look at the strange juxtapositions of morality around you.
Billions spent on new weapons in order to humanely murder other humans.
Rights of criminals are given more respect than the privacy of their victims.
Although there are people suffering in poverty, huge donations are made to protect endangered species. Everyone grows up being told the same thing.
Be nice to other people.
But beat out the competition.
You're special. Believe in yourself and you will succeed.
But it's obvious from the start that only a few can succeed.
You exercise your right to freedom, and this is the result.
It's almost as if he's talking about wokeism like 23 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue.
All rhetoric to avoid conflict and protect each other from hurt.
Here, the AI illustrates the various ways in which human error corrupts truth. That human error arises from an instinctual drive to protect ourselves emotionally and physically, which truth tends to threaten. For instance, let's say a religious fundamentalist is confronted with various scientific truths that challenge their worldview. Let's say the fundamentalist loses faith when confronted by those truths. What happens psychologically is that because the fundamentalist no longer has a belief system to make sense of the world, they are thrown into a mental pit of confusion and resentment. That loss of structure uncertainty is so painful to the ideologue that it seems it would be better to avoid that feeling at all costs. This instinct is endemic to almost all human beings. This is why we separate ourselves into political tribes and won't consider the ethical implications of our positions. For instance, is it right to be pro-choice or pro-life? Instead of considering the validity of either side's argument, the pro-life crowd will chastise the pro-choice crowd as being on par with murderers, and the pro-choice crowd will chastise the pro-life crowd as being misogynist, religious zealots that want to control women.
And this is a perfect example of the problem of everything is now if you're on a side, your cognitive dissonance will not allow you to even entertain another thought. And so when you have close to now 7 billion people using smartphones in this way, I just read something today about the Amazon tribes finally getting like using like smartphones, and they're already addicted to things like porn and social media. And you know, I'm a carnivore, I'm a keto guy, and I try to be as open-minded as I can and not say that this is the answer for everyone. But it also makes it impossible for me to ever watch, let's say, vegan propaganda and take it seriously. It's like, oh, the twin studies on Netflix. I start watching it, I see Dr. Greger, and I'm like, yeah, I know what this is already going to be, and my bias won't allow me to entertain it. And so how can anyone, especially growing up in this age, know what truth really is when they can validate any belief they want?
I think that the trick to it is to just believe that you could be wrong about anything that you believe. And that might give you the humility to evaluate new information.
Do you really see that as being common?
Has maybe not.
Maybe not even been common.
No, I don't think it's been common. I think that a lot of people, like they were describing, to avoid hurt feelings and uncertainty, reject any foreign ideas. I think that's very common. But it's a lot like knowing how to code a computer back in the late to early 90s. You know, back in those days, you know, that was a skill set that was rare, but when you had it, it was like a superpower.
Okay, so it goes back to what I was saying before. In the 80s, in the 90s, and on some level the 2000s, we're all staring at a screen, and I could talk about the positives and negatives of that, but it's the same thing. If we both open the exact same Facebook profile, for example, we're going to have completely different experiences. That there is no universal connected experience anymore at all. Everything is individualized, and everything is, hey, you clicked on this link that talks about, let's say, Trump, so let's feed you, anti-vax stories and things like that. That's what the AI does this, not humans. And AI is doing this. Oh, you clicked on support for Joe Biden. Let's feed you this pro-choice like group. And especially when you're a child growing up in that, as a child growing up in that world, your truth is being shaped by an algorithm that's trying to hook you into the system without any forethought about what truth is, to the point where the people creating it, you know, they talk about there's a social dilemma. The creators of like the software, they're addicted to their own software. Oh, I help create Gmail, and I can't stop using my own Gmail, and I know exactly what the code is, and yet I can't stop accessing it. It's human nature to be stuck in cognitive dissonance and to reject alternative ideas. It's not natural to think you're wrong. It's painful. It's very painful to think you might be wrong. And the more it reinforces it, the more painful it becomes. And then, well, eventually he's going to talk about this. It creates violence.
Yeah.
These low-resolution assumptions exacerbate tensions between political parties and can potentially lead to violent conflict. Most people will avoid these difficult conversations to preserve order, but if you ignore them long enough, political positions become cemented, and people will kill each other before they admit that they're wrong about it.
There were people who were murdered, friends murdering friends because they voted for Donald Trump. Like murdering for someone that you voted for. In 1984, the year 1984, even though this video game is very much like a modern warning, like, you know, talking about 1984 and stuff like that. 49 states voted for Ronald Reagan. The only state that didn't was Minnesota, the one that I think his name was Walter Mondale was governor of. Now, every election is going to be 50-50. That's not healthy. It's not healthy if you can't look past your tribalism.
Hmm. Yes, there's another video. I'm gonna have to watch it first to show you, but this guy Brett Weinstein
Yes, I know
talks
who he
about
is.
that. Yeah, he talks about this as like an evolutionary adaptation to preserve your own genes.
Yeah. Okay. And ironically, it's causing less people to be able to procreate.
Yeah.
About something. The AI then present a future where human bias corrupts the flow of information.
The untested truths, spun by different interests, continue to churn and accumulate in the sandbox of political correctness and value systems.
Everyone withdraws into their own small gated community, afraid of a larger forum. They stay inside their little ponds, leaking whatever truth suits them into the growing cesspool of society at large.
The different cardinal truths neither clash nor mesh. No one is invalidated, but nobody is right.
Not even natural selection can take place here. The world is being engulfed in truth.
And this is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but a whimper.
As we saw in the 20th century, whether it is with Hitler's fascism or Stalin and Mao's communism, the ideologically possessed would rather kill millions in the name of their ideology rather than consider the arguments of their political opponents. We see this type of attitude in its nascent stages in the digital age, whether it's calling everybody who disagrees with you a racist, sexist, homophobic Nazi, or a West-hating communist. This attitude is pervasive throughout social media, forums, and comment sections.
I've literally heard people call Ben Shapiro a Nazi.
Yeah.
Whether you like him or you hate him, you really think a yarmulke wearing Jew is a Nazi?
Yeah, exactly.
We're not thinking anymore. It's all about emotions and feelings and reactivity. As someone with my mental disorder, I know what that's about personally, but watching it is telling.
This type of inflammatory language has further polarized our political climate and has resulted in violent clashes. In the mind of the AI, this is due to the fact that we insulate ourselves by staying inside our little ponds and casting all outsiders and dissidents as bad people. If this continues to happen, who knows what violent oppressive future might manifest? Unlike the reality of MGS2, where a supposedly benevolent AI can make the hard decisions for us, our reality might become a sort of Orwellian nightmare, which the AI wants to prevent.
We're trying to stop that from happening.
It's our responsibility as rulers. Just as in genetics, unnecessary information and memory must be filtered out
Okay, hold on.
to stimulate the evolution of the species.
I think that this, if I had anything to nitpick, I think that this game doesn't understand how evolution works.
Well, okay, he's not literally talking about genes. He's talking about memes, and I don't mean memes in the internet age. You know
The Richard Dawkins memes. Yeah,
the Richard Dawkins memes. Yeah, he's talking about that. There's infinite memes, and most of them are crap. And no human being can claim anymore which one is crap and not. How do you know that? When was the last time you got information away from your screen? And they'll talk about it more. This is a 2-part video, but they'll talk about it more. But like, how do I know that everything I've learned about nutrition and diet and all that stuff is true? Now, I have my personal experience for me, and me personally, I can claim that. But how do I know? How do I know that it's not a bunch of crap and that I'm not going to die in like next year from a heart attack? How do I know that Sean Baker, I spoke to him today. I literally asked him questions today. So I'm not saying that I don't believe it. How do I know it's not just a fucking deep fake? How do you know is the question. And I'm not talking metaphysically no. I'm talking about no within the confines of human reality.
Yeah, like certainty no, yeah.
That when he means evolution of the species, we're sitting there wasting time arguing about our different truths instead of making social and technological progress in a positive way. He doesn't mean like genetic evolution. He means societal evolution.
So like the thing about that is that like this period technology and the society that we have now is going to act as a filter, and so that only the people who survive to reproduction are going to pass through it. I don't know who those people are going to be necessarily, but like this so to me, this is like still another example of evolution. It's like, yeah, evolution's still going to happen. Like, it's
Okay, so think about what brought us together. It's home math. What is he always talking about? The end of our society. Why is he talking about it? This is one of the reasons. It's like, do you really want, think about it. Do you really want the very technology we're talking on to go away? Like, I talk about throwing it out, but that doesn't mean I want it to go away. I'm only talking about how it's destroying things. He doesn't necessarily mean the extinction of our species unless you're talking about nuclear war, which every single Metal Gear is about nuclear threat of nuclear war, by the way. So there's a tie in there. But are you really only concerned about, well, as long as there's one man and one woman, everything's fine?
It's not so much that. It's just that I think that the tools will also come about because the necessity for objective truth is going to rear its ugly head eventually. Like, we're heading for a financial collapse. We're heading for people are not going to be having kids as much as they used to, and I think that the objective people are going to figure it out.
What objective people are left when all of our information is getting from the internet and not from personal experience or real life discussion?
There's some people that are still not participating or not primarily getting the information from the internet. There's people out there that have access to this objective understanding.
Well, let's continue and see if it gives you a different perspective, because there's more to be discussed, obviously.
Yeah, sure.
And you think you're qualified to decide what's necessary and not?
Absolutely. Who else could wade through the sea of garbage you people produce, retrieve valuable truths, and even interpret their meaning for later generations?
That's what it means to create context.
I want to remind you all that Metal Gear Solid 2 came out in 2001. This game was warning us about the advent of fake news, misinformation, and half-truths roughly 2 decades before the issue captured our collective attention. Worse yet, not only do the AIs describe a potentially dystopian future for both our reality and the reality of the game, but they also make us inadvertently realize that we currently have no constructive solution to the problem. The only tactic available at the moment is for individuals to strengthen their moral compass and call out misinformation where possible. However, given humanity's inherent imperfection, even the best of us are prone to mistakes. Worse yet, instead of bolstering the best among us despite their mistakes, we will feverishly exacerbate the mistakes of our opponents for political gain. We see this quite vividly in what has been aptly termed call-out culture.
Cancel culture, no.
For instance, it is thanks to this culture that there is no host for the Oscars this year. It is thanks to this culture that people will be fired from their job over a tweet they made 10 years ago. A person might even be fired for a tweet that was taken out of context, when said person did nothing wrong whatsoever. Worst of all, it is thanks to this culture that we will elect politicians not based on their ethics or policies, but on how effectively they can punch the other side. And let me re-emphasize, we have no solution to this problem. In the reality of Metal Gear Solid 2, however, a hypothetical solution is presented. Because people abuse the responsibility that comes along with freedom of speech and expression and would rather attack people than their ideas, a system that controls information must be set up, supposedly for our own good.
He's talking about Friedrich Nietzsche when he says that there's a lot of Nietzsche in this conversation and existential philosophy about freedom and abuse of freedom. The AI is literally going to say that. I'm just commenting on that because I'm very big into existentialism.
The AI go into more detail regarding this solution as the conversation goes on. However, that analysis will have to be saved for the second part of this video.
Okay, so part 1 is done. It's 2 parts. Any other comments?
Not yet. I think I want to see what else they say.
Okay, the conversation is longer. He cuts out some of it, but I think somebody cuts out is good, but we'll just continue with what he's doing.
Before we continue, allow me to summarize the main arguments from Part 1. The Patriot AI argues that in the internet age, the flow of information has become far too complex and grandiose. The natural outcome of this overabundance of information is that human beings, on account of their natural fallibility, are unable to separate factual and valuable information from information that is at best incomplete and at worst filled with outright lies. On account of our tribal instincts, our political biases, our emotional fragility, and flawed intellect, we will potentially embrace information that conforms to our worldview best, rather than information that is true. In the era of fake news, this has undoubtedly been demonstrated as fact, as we build up echo chambers that confirm our political leanings and demonize those who express dissent. In response to the inherent truth of this argument, the AIs propose a frightening solution. Create a system that controls human will and consciousness. A system that compromises a human being's quote-unquote free will to come to their own conclusions. Though such a system is repulsive to myself and hopefully many of you, the AIs will demonstrate how human beings might abuse their freedom so much that such a system might be inevitable. Worse yet, they demonstrate how easily a system could be implemented without protest, as the main character Raiden so clearly proves.
I'll decide for myself what to believe and what to pass on.
But is that even your own idea?
Or something Snake told you.
That line sticks with me every day of my life. Is anything I'm saying my own idea anymore, or something I heard from Metal Gear, or Jordan Peterson, or Home Math, or a carnivore guy, or a keto guy, or a how do I know what? How often are we coming up with original thought versus somebody else's thought that you have no idea if they're just fucking with you? I mean, people kill over things that are said that are literally just jokes. Like there were literally troll messages spread on WhatsApp that were just joking. Like they were just trying to troll. They weren't even being serious, and it caused like mass murders in other countries over like information that wasn't even intended to be thought of as real. Like, when this game came out, I don't think they thought about or predicted the addiction base of smartphones. Like I just said, I found out 6.8 billion of the 8 billion are on a smartphone. When you think about what you're saying, how often can you remember why you learned what you learned? And it's like, oh, well, what's the difference between that and a book? A book is not, it's not the same thing. It's not instant. It's not infinite. It's not constant. It's not auto-played to the next bias filter.
I think that
if you ask me, where did you get? Is this your own idea or something XYZ told you? I could probably tell you, no, it's something XYZ told me. I don't know if it's true or not.
but I think that there's something to be said about like how important is it to have original ideas? Because most original ideas are crap.
Without original ideas, you have no evolution. If everything is based on what you already believe, you can't evolve. You have to have original ideas that to progress forward. Nothing. It can't just be recycling. That's what evolution really is. Evolution is a simple term. Adapt or perish. And part of that is new ideas. And there's infinite ideas. And we're not testing those ideas. We're not exploring those ideas. We're not questioning those ideas. We're screaming that they are the truth, as opposed to actually doing them, let's say. How many people, like, even myself on some level, talk about the benefits of like clean eating and exercise and diet? How many people actually tell that to somebody else but doesn't do it themselves? How many people will demonize, let's say, a carnivore keto diet, a vegan diet, a paleo diet, a Mediterranean diet, and never actually try it themselves? The bodybuilding culture on the internet, the Dr. Mikes of the world, they're very myopic. It's all about numbers. It's all about what the stats show, what the studies show. And then later on, when they find out how many of those studies turned out to be corrupted or fraudulent or fake, well, then they just say, well, that turned out that was fake, but we can still trust everything else. It's like you have to be able to think originally, and we're not. We're arguing about what other people are telling us, what possible deep fakes are telling us, if you know what I mean. We're not arguing about whether or not I tested this idea. And to see if it has valuable truth for the future or not. We're screaming that I'm right and everyone else is an idiot.
So like when I was a teenager, I tried to like make sure that everything I believed was true, and I kind of reconstructed my mental framework piece by piece and try to make sure as much of it as possible was not delusional or whatever. And the thing with that is that is some very, very hard work. It's very, very difficult to like question every little thing. So I think to some degree, unoriginal ideas are just saving you time and getting your results without you having to do anything.
What results? The world is fucking falling apart as a result of these unoriginal ideas that are mostly crap. What progress?
I think that
you said it before. There's going to be a financial collapse. This is part of the reason why. Why was the Capitol building stormed on January 6th? The internet programming people, shaping people's behavior. It's not just about ideas. It's actually causing people to take actions at will in some way.
But it's like, which people were the ones doing the storming? Like there was a guy with buffalo horns on, you know.
But that's very, very disrespectful and judgmental to human beings to think, oh well, they don't count as human.
No, I didn't say they didn't count as human. My point is that there's always, you can make a claim about the population and a small percentage is going to align with that claim, like pretty much anything you say.
And that's not true. Everyone using the internet is being shaped in a direction. They're not thinking originally. There's 7 billion people now being shaped. Like I said, go outside. Look at how much time people spend on their phones. Go in your settings. Look at how much time you spend on your phone. There's a reason why I have flip phones, because it's not just about going back in time. It's to spend less time being addicted to this stuff, knowing full well what it's doing to me. And there's hypocrisy here. I'm being a hypocrite. I'm fucking recording a podcast and sending it to people. I talked about that with you earlier today. Like there's hypocrisy in what I'm saying, and you have to have some of that in life. I recognize that. But you have to recognize, think about it. How is there a child growing up in this world that has that capability when that's the only source of reality that they've been exposed to is the virtual reality? Think of children, not of the adults, not of the old people, not of someone like me who in the 80s didn't have the internet. Think of the 20-year-olds, the 10-year-olds, the 2-year-olds with iPads, and forgetting about what the technology is doing to their brain. That's the future. I think there's a reason why we have 80-year-olds and late 70-year-olds running for president, because they don't trust anybody younger than them to have a functioning mind. And then what are we going to do when all of our, how many people in America are still relying? I'm one of them in some way, still like having dependency on their parents and maxing out their credit cards, draining their savings. Oh, that's COVID's fault. It's like, you can point to that as something, but we still have choice. And that choice is being shaped by the internet. You see an ad on your Facebook for Burger King. I've heard this on, is this my own idea or something Snake told me? This is something I heard on Adam Ruins Everything. You have your unique ID codes on the internet, which quote unquote hides your identity from humans, but it doesn't hide it from the AI. And you scroll through an ad on your social media for Burger King, and then say in that same day, around that same time, you go to Burger King and buy something. That credit card you used is tied to your social media, and they know that ad worked. You didn't choose necessarily to go to Burger King that day and make a conscious decision. You were programmed to do so. Now, that's a much more simplistic example, but that's my point. The Arab Spring in 2011 in Egypt was formulated on Facebook. The January 6th attack was formulated on the internet. It wasn't people thinking this is something I should be doing on their own. This is their political biases being shoved down their throats so aggressively that, hey, let's literally kill the vice president because my feelings. Because of feelings. Not because of facts. Not because of truths. Not because of moralistic implications. Simply because of what a fucking screen told them to do. In an indirect way. Not by humans, but by an AI. Like, it's very hard for people to comprehend this stuff because, well, their cognitive dissonance is going to kick in and they're not going to want to live an isolated life when they're so addicted to their screens. I live this. It's very painful to turn this shit off. It's very painful to recognize when I get that notification sound, the dopamine hits, and I want to know who it is and what they're saying, and then to be disappointed 90% of the time because it's not necessarily what I want in the moment or what I'm hoping for. Like, the argument that there are individuals who can succumb doesn't change the fact that a society relies on everyone.
Right. I mean, I think in moments like those people are probably otherwise productive members of society. At least, let's just say most of them.
I'm not seeing that. I don't know. It's like a lot of jobs are having a hard time finding people to work. Every time I go to my job, we just had at my job one of the, I don't know if it's a vice president of the entire company fly in from California. They just changed the staff again in the sales staff, the personal training staff. They want to clean up the place and do these other things. But what do I notice with that sales staff? No matter who it is, all day, they're on their phones looking at nonsense at work. All day. I see this everywhere. Nobody's studying. Nobody's learning. I'm not saying they never do it, but no. I go to my therapy at Rutgers last year and I'm like, have to knock on the window because the girl who's at the front desk is watching a movie while at work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the AI in this game in Metal Gear wasn't predicting this. They weren't talking about this, but people are literally spending all day, every day in mindless entertainment as opposed to being productive.
I mean, I would agree that that's a problem. But like I said, I think that there's like certain personality types of certain people that are going to use the technology to thrive rather than to, than to
And they
rot.
won't continue thriving with that technology if everything collapses. And how is it not going to collapse in the way things are going?
I don't know. Like I don't have an answer per se, but like I do know that there's been. See, I can sort of predict what the next response is going to be, but like I'll just say it. There's been predictions of mass starvation, for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That people are some accountant somewhere starts noticing how many people there are, how many more people there are year after year. They say, "Oh, this is exponential," and we're going to exhaust the food supply. And then, but what ends up happening is that market forces take over, and that you have people producing what other people are demanding.
And it's different. It is different now. Like normally you would make the argument of, okay, everyone outspent themselves and now there's a recession and that will correct everything in the long run. But it's different because it doesn't seem to, I see this in my personal life with a lot of people I know personally. They have no concept of their financial future at all. And yet they're still, I suffer from this, still spending, not saving, not investing, not making more mature decisions. It's just, I want my screen, I want my comfort food, I want my comfort movies, I want my comfort Netflix, and I'll worry about it later. And the Metal Gear didn't talk about this in the terms of the smartphone era, but when you're a drug addict, I've been to rehab. I've seen people who've been to rehab. They say they were there 25 times. There are 7 billion people being addicted to this stuff, and the screen is so addicting that it's more important to feed your addiction, especially when you get all of your social life from it on some level, at least you think you do, that you'd rather not pay it. You can't pay it. I mean, how much do addictions ruin people's lives? And now everyone's an addict. And I'm addicting people right now if they're watching this. I feel bad about that, even though I'm trying to help.
Well, I think that like it's also like books, right? Like you can have a book that is like good for people to read, and you have a book that's kind of like a waste of your time or harmful to you.
So the internet is designed to be a slot machine for the purposes of, this is the literal philosophy of all internet AI algorithms. Design it exactly like a slot machine. The goal is to get you to use our platform as long as possible. The original intent was to sell ads. Now it's being used to shape people's behavior by, say, political bodies or other countries or even America. The goal of the design of this stuff is to make you a slot machine addict. Look on your phone whenever you scroll Facebook. Look on your phone whenever you scroll YouTube. Why does it look like a slot machine? Intermittent rewards to keep you hooked. It's not possible to argue that addictive substances are not addictive just because you think you can overcome them. It's like the argument of, I'm not like everybody else, says everyone, which makes everyone the same by just saying it. Oh, I'm not like the other women, I'm not like the other guys, but you're all saying it. And what you're being fed is most of the time fake news. And people are cemented in that fake news now. And it's almost every single person on the planet. It's not just a select few people. It's not just a vocal minority. It's literally almost every single person on the entire planet.
What I think I was meaning by the book analogy was that I do think that people's feeds vary, and some people are getting more brain rot type of stuff, and other people are getting perhaps more useful type of stuff. Like if I was to go to my YouTube, let me see what I see on my YouTube.
How do you know that? How do you know
Because-
that yours? How do you know that yours is special and everybody else's?
No, not that it's special. It's the same as everybody else's. Like it's based on my interests, and so like if I have interests that are like in some way productive, then it's going to show me more of the stuff that it thinks I want to see.
Don't you think that's a problem?
Not necessarily, not per se, because like some of the stuff that I have is like physics related. Some of the stuff is math related. It's a lot of science, a lot of like history, some business stuff. So like I would say that my feed when I open YouTube, it's like generally giving me things that I think that I do have value, that I do find valuable.
How do you know that that value wasn't implanted on you by the technology itself? Why do you
Well,
assume it's yours?
I mean, I don't think it was implanted by technology because, like you, I was born before the internet or before the social media.
Right. So when you're 65 years old, what's the world going to be like as a result of the other people who didn't have that framework?
65. So 30 years from now.
Think about this. You're 30 years from now. Think of every child born this year. They will be 30 years old at that point. Or think of the people who are 10 years old. They'll be 40. Think of the 20-year-olds. They'll be 50. They will be running the world. It's not going to be us. We're going to be old. We're going to rely on them to run the world. And what's their framework of reality? We often forget in all of the, I always say this, all the red pill dating advice debates on the internet, never, ever do they discuss all of these, theoretical evolutionary responses as being for children. It's always about getting men laid and giving women rights, but it's never about the actual kids. Won't you please think of the children?
Well, let me put it to you like this. This is something that I think kind of illustrates my point about evolution and like economic forces. When Homath is putting out his content and it shows to a lot of people to have good explanatory power, I think that he found himself suddenly like sort of skyrocketed to a lot of people's feeds. So the feed is not necessarily trying to make you dumb. It's just giving you stuff that you want. Like that's the best way to keep you hooked.
And most people want mindless entertainment. That's not something Metal Gear is talking about. They want mindless entertainment. They don't want to be bored any moment of their life.
Sure, but
that's what I'm literally seeing. When I first realized I had a problem with cannabis, it was watching my street dealer. It wasn't anything else. It was watching my street dealer sit there telling me he doesn't want to be distributing drugs anymore. He doesn't want to be a marijuana dealer. He wants to buy a truck and drive it across the country and make deliveries. But when I'm hanging out with him at his house and we're smoking together, he's sitting there for over an hour, hours, scrolling basically like shorts, cat videos, funny videos, mindless stuff. Hours that could be used. You could put it on the big screen. Look, there's a guy, Dave Meltzer. I was a big fan of pro wrestling. I was almost addicted to like the podcasts and stuff like that about pro wrestling for my dark period in the mid 2000s. He watches 90 hours of professional wrestling a week. And he is almost 60 and he's jacked. Like he's not as jacked as Vince McMahon, but he's got a six-pack. He's muscular. Why? Because when he's watching TV, he's exercising. How many people do that? Well, they can do that. They don't. And why is he watching 90 hours of pro wrestling a week? It's his job. He gets paid to do it. He's the top insider in the business. So it's like his career is tied to the screen in that way. It makes sense for him to be staring at a screen all day. And he's watching one thing for one purpose, to be able to write. They had a New York Times article on this guy. He's written over 1 million words, like millions and millions of words in his life, all about one subject. Not the infinite subjects that we chase where it's all, please me, I'm bored, please me, hand me a pussy, hand me a dick, hand me a wife, hand me a husband, hand me food so I don't have my mattress. That's the world we live in. That's the modernized world. It's all gimme, 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 and which should be like the most amazing thing to be able to recognize, to say, holy shit, I don't have to leave my mattress and I can get my food delivered, my drinks delivered. I can get my sex delivered, like my virtual sex, I guess, through porn. I don't have to leave my mattress and I can have every single thing I want. Isn't that amazing? No. And obviously it's not amazing to stay in your mattress all day. It's misery. But that's the point. We have all of this privilege and we're all miserable because it's so fucking addicting and it's so automatic and it's so instant.
I think that it, like, you know about the experiment of Rat Park, right?
Of course, yeah.
So I think what I think I'm trying to say is that, like, what we're talking about has both the things that we're saying in it. It has the instant gratification, pleasure seeking kind of content, but it also has this other kind of. It's also possible to nourish yourself with the information that you're seeking to your benefit. And I think that what we find happening is that people are behaving a lot like the rats at Rat Park. When you give them everything, like they sort of indulge. Or when you give them drugs, for example, they sort of indulge in drugs and they got nothing better to do. But when you put them in better environments and you give them better things, they do begin to like assimilate to that new environment. And I think that the people that you're describing tend to have really poor environments, really nothing else going on besides their phone. And that's probably the reason why they're choosing it.
And that's why I go back to the rehab analogy. It's a drug. Every notification sound is a dopamine hit. Every time you get an email from Facebook saying somebody liked your photo, your brain is going to compel you to click on that link and look at it. That it's not a rat park in today's world. It's the isolated cage. And am I wrong about that? People playing video games all day, scrolling TikTok all day, at work, literally at work, scrolling these things all day. It's like, oh, I've got all this work to do. Let me scroll this instead. It's like, everyone's in the cage. They're not in the rat park. That's part of the mission I want to try to promote to people is turn this off and go outside and actually talk to each other. In China, they invoke a curfew for a lot of this stuff where it's like 10, 11 o'clock, screens off, got to go to bed. You got to actually get healthy sleep. They have server farms in China. I don't know if you've seen this where smartphones automatically liking, sharing, and subscribing, and clicking things without a human interaction. Like it's estimated that 50% of the internet is fake, like fake people. It's like, no, like the rat park analogy is a great analogy. Nobody's in the rat park; they're in their cage, and so they're going to constantly keep getting the drug.
That's what I'm talking about.
You were never, it's like heroin is technically not as physically addictive as we think it is, but it's very addictive in its own way. While alcohol and benzos can kill you from the withdrawal. And I've experienced this leaving like hospitals and stuff where I didn't have my phone for 2 weeks, where as soon as I use it, the first thing I see, I can feel the rush of chemicals come to my brain. It's like we would never say this if the entire world was addicted to alcohol. We would say there's a problem and we got to do something about it.
Well, they tried to do that in the 1920s and it didn't work.
Well, the whole world wasn't addicted to alcohol back then, and it never has been. Now you have a bunch of people injecting drugs into their brain all day. Eventually, they're all going to be addicts. Just like I said about the Amazon tribe. Allegedly, they just started using technology. They're already addicted to porn. It's that powerful. It's why it's different. It's why people say this is different. The power that these devices have is mind-bogglingly strong. But I'd like to continue.
Yeah, sure. I will say, I think I need to get going in 11:30 for me.
Sure, we'll finish this and we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
That's the proof of your incompetence right there. You lack the qualifications to exercise free will.
Never in my life have I heard an insult as cutting and condescending. Put aside just for a second whether or not quote-unquote free will is a valid concept. To say that somebody lacks the qualifications to exercise free will suggests that their personality is entirely constructed by outside forces. For example, if you believe that abortion is an unethical practice, Or an ethical practice, did you come to that conclusion yourself? Did you put together a bunch of arguments from opposing sides and decide for yourself what the best answer was? Or did you hear one person's argument and close yourself off to opposing arguments, much like an ideologue tends to do? In regards to Raiden, the AI goes on to demonstrate that he, like billions of people on the planet, tend to embrace ideas and actions not necessarily based on their adherence to truth, but rather based on how effectively they promote a certain way of being. This goes back to Nietzsche's famous criticism of philosophers in Beyond Good and Evil. While philosophers might proclaim a desire for objective truth, they are more than likely trying to justify their worldview and way of life. This is why fake news exists. This is why echo chambers crop up all over the internet, despite the wealth of information available to us that should allow us to live in accordance with truth. It is because living in accordance with truth and developing a sense of free will can be life-threatening, so people choose to embrace falsehoods in order to protect their sanity. Raiden then desperately protests that he is not a product of the mindless masses.
That's not true. I have the right.
Does something like a self exist inside of you?
That which you call self serves as nothing more than a mask to cover your own being.
In this era of ready-made truths, self is just something used to preserve those positive emotions that you occasionally feel.
Another possibility is that self is a concept you conveniently borrowed under the logic that would endow you with some sense of strength.
That's crap!
Is it? Would you prefer that someone else tell you? All right then. Explain it to him.
Jack, you're simply the best, and you got there all by yourself.
Up until this point in the game, Raiden and the player believed that their successes were achieved entirely by their own merit. However, the AI revealed that the entire mission was structured in a way so that Raiden would succeed as long as he obeyed orders. For Raiden to find out that he was not in fact a legendary mercenary but rather a clueless puppet that helped enslave the world is bad enough. However, it is when the AI offers the more ideal fiction to Raiden that he is simply the best that the insult has its greatest effect. Raiden cringes and holds back a scream because he sees the truth inherent in the AI's argument. That argument being that Raiden is not his own person. His actions and emotions are all controlled by a higher power. He's not Raiden. He's not even Jack. He's something else's creation. The AI then go on to show how Raiden's lack of self is endemic to billions of people.
Oh, what happened? Do you feel lost? Why not try a bit of soul searching?
Don't think you'll find anything, though.
Ironic that although self is something that you yourself fashion, every time something goes wrong, you turn around and place the blame on something else.
It's not my fault. It's not your fault.
In denial, you simply resort to looking for another, more convenient truth in order to make yourself feel better.
Leaving behind in an instant the so-called truth you once embraced.
Once again, the AI demonstrate how people will gravitate to quote-unquote truths, not because they are based entirely on empirical fact, but because they satisfy the instinctual need for structure and stability. For argument's sake, let's imagine somebody who has spent half their life advocating a belief that the Earth was flat, that the government wants people to believe it is round for territorial reasons. Let's say the flat earther is presented conclusive information that proves the Earth is round. If they accept that they were wrong, that would mean they spent over half their life advocating falsehoods and manipulating impressionable minds. What toll would that realization take upon their soul? If they don't accept that they were wrong, they will accept a more convenient truth to protect their emotional persona. Such a truth might be that the evidence presented to them was doctored, and that the person presenting the information is a government shill. This behavior extends not just to conspiracy theorists, but anybody with a political position. This is the reason why millions of people continue to advocate for political systems despite their proven track record of killing millions of people. This is why people still uphold certain superstitious beliefs despite their scientific invalidity. This behavior is not relegated to a few irrational individuals. It's something that everybody does, regardless of their political position. I do it, and you do it. And worst of all, in a democracy, the emotionally fragile have a say in what is truth, which the AI shall now criticize.
Should someone like that be able to decide what is truth?
Should someone like you even have the right to decide?
You've done nothing but abuse your freedom.
You don't deserve to be free.
We're not the ones smothering the world. You are.
Because the AI is grew out of the White House's quote-unquote primordial soup, they recognized the inherent value of freedom and the responsibility that comes along with it. In their mind, Raiden and billions like him take all the benefits of freedom without accepting any of the responsibility that comes along with it. Instead of using their freedom to seek out truths that foster the human race, they resort to partisanship and ideology to make sense of the world. Instead of being introspective and considering the potential faults in one's position, they will cast the blame elsewhere. The result of this is stagnation, and soon afterwards, violence. This extends not just to our leaders, but to ourselves.
The individual is supposed to be weak, but far from powerless. A single person has the potential to ruin the world.
And the age of digitized communication has given even more power to the individual. Too much power for an immature species.
Building a legacy involves figuring out what is wanted and what needs to be done for that goal. All this you used to struggle with. Now, we think for you.
We are your guardians, after all.
You want to control human thought? Human behavior?
Of course. Anything can be quantified nowadays.
At this juncture, I feel the need to repeat something I said in the first video. I am not for censorship or controlling information whatsoever. I think the ultimate conclusion that the AIs come to is wrong. Even if they were right, I am certainly not giving up the ability to control my own life and make my own decisions. But put aside their conclusion and consider whether or not their arguments are wrong. Do human beings consume fake news and accept it as truth? Do billions of people hold beliefs that are objectively wrong? Can ideologues and fundamentalists negatively influence our society? If the 20th century is any indication, it only takes one bad idea, and maybe even one bad person, to ruin the world. In the social media age, this ruination becomes all the more likely, as almost anybody can build up a large enough following to influence millions of minds. They don't even need a large following. They could just covertly produce a system like the one the AIs are proposing. And when AI inevitably comes to be, maybe our reality could see its reflection in the reality of Metal Gear Solid 2. For the sake of time and brevity, I will skip over the next few minutes of this conversation. They are basically a retread of what has already been discussed. Before I play the final clip, I wish to summarize what the AI accomplished. They created a scenario where Raiden, and by extension the player, had to obey several different orders from their commanding officer. It did not matter if many of those orders seemed unjustifiable. What mattered to Raiden and the gamer was being able to live out a fantasy as a legendary mercenary. That emotional desire was so strong that it prevented any form of rationality. This emotional desire overcoming rationality is reflective of many different situations in our everyday lives. We see it in our news feeds, on our social media, and even in our own actions. Unlike human beings, AI are not prone to emotion. For this reason, the AIs feel they are the saviors of humankind. They will control thought so human beings may live in blissful ignorance, and the AIs no longer have to tolerate mass stupidity. In their victory, the AI mocks Raiden for his various faults.
So you see, you're a perfect representative of the masses we need to protect. This is why we chose you. You accepted the fiction we've provided, obeyed our orders, and did everything you were told to. The exercise is a resounding success.
Didn't I tell you that GW is still incomplete? But not anymore, thanks to you.
Your persona, experiences, triumphs, and defeats are nothing but byproducts. The real objective was ensuring that we could generate and manipulate them. It's taken a lot of time and money, but it was well worth it considering the results.
Is this our future? If we have no systemic solution to the problem of fake news, and we continue to drown in overflowing information, what will our society become? This video game, not a book, not a movie, a video game, so eloquently explained the impossibility of this problem roughly 2 decades before it reached public consciousness. The fact that it was all done within this 15-minute conversation makes it truly the most profound moment in gaming history. It is a moment that has haunted me for decades, specifically because of how it makes a pessimistic future seem so certain. I figured that any solution, no matter how ineffective it may seem, would be better than to let Kojima's nightmare come to pass. As I briefly referenced in the first video, there is one thing that can be done. We must rediscover the power that an individual holds. If a single person has the potential to ruin the world, a single person has the potential to save it. I hold no delusions of grandeur for myself, but I know that there is strength in numbers. If enough people wake up to the complex problem of misinformation, half-truths, and fake news, and do everything in their power to live in accordance with fact rather than tribalistic instinct, we will most certainly survive. But even better than that, we will be able to preserve our freedom for the coming generations. The power is in your hands.
I'm literally watching this in my life right now. I don't want to get too personal, like on a public forum. I'm watching that concept of like freedom and lack of responsibility to destroy my family and what we've built. I'm seeing it destroy a lot of friendships. It's destroyed some of my own relationships. And I don't have delusions of grandeur either. I just know that no matter what the truth is of what we just watched or the stuff, we know there's some truth to what just happened about fake news being propagated and a lot of people like stuck on their phones. But I often try to say, what do we all have in common? I think I've said this to you before, and it's just like, well, what's the one thing that we know everyone needs? And it's food. And so I saved my psychology, my potential future for myself through basically eating foods that on some level could have been eaten thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago, and wanting other people to recognize like they could do the same. But it's painful to watch all of these things. I'm very sensitive in that way. Like when I see diabetics eating and people with like stage 3 cancer eating the cookies and stuff, I get, there's a part of my emotional side that just welts up. It's like, not like I know that they can, let's say a cancer victim could save themselves, but I know that they can be better and have a better chance. And it's that infinite pleasure I was talking about before that is causing it. It's like, I'd rather feel good now than think about the future. And that's my point is, I think the one thing we can agree on is that it's very rare to people to really focus on the future. It's, we tell ourselves to do these things, but then we live in the moment to escape the moment, to escape the negative feelings that are often being caused by our pleasures. And I just feel like what I see with smartphones isn't allowing us to progress to anything but a nightmare. And it's painful. And I wish I had less empathy just so that I wouldn't be so affected by it.
Mm.
And I don't remember exactly what he was saying in the video, but it made me think about like, I am presenting my shaped perspective, if you know what I mean. Like they're arguing that nobody has their own thoughts; they have their own, and it's all being programmed, or that it's, we're not considering other arguments or whatever it is, and it's I am offering the perspective that was shaped to me by this very content, and I reinforce that not just by Googling or YouTubing or whatever, but by looking at people outside in real life. And God, the best case scenario is that we all have really bad tech neck when we get older, if you know what I mean.
Really bad what?
Tech neck.
Uh-huh.
And if you want to understand, like, this is an example of why you say, like, why is Homath talking about things he talks about and having like a negative viewpoint? It's because of stuff like this. And I don't even think he realizes that I mean, I'm sure he knows, like he tells people, like, not that there's anything wrong with playing video games, but don't waste your time on them. I played from 2014, 2018, or 2017, 18. Like, I mean, if you include Metal Gear Solid 5, which I always say is different for me, that was like 800 hours. But if you include everything else, it was like 6,000 hours of my life in front of a screen. 7,000 hours in 4 years, maybe 100,000 hours of my entire life since I was a child in front of a screen, when I could have been doing so much more, even with half that time. Not saying that you have to turn them off like black and white, but part of my own emotional issues stem from knowing that I could have been so much better than I am now. No matter how good I am now, I could have been so much better. And I'm late to the game. And the one advantage I have was my rational thought, and knowing that no matter all this stuff that we have, life is wonderful and life is great. And that's from an evolutionary perspective. And the one thing about it that sucks is social connection in real life, and dating connection and romance and love life and friends is, if it's not real, it's like real, then it's not real. If it's virtual, then it's not real. It's lonely.
I think we might. So in my head, and I've said this before to you, that I'm something of an eternal optimist. I think that people will figure it out, and I think that people, just like how people are figuring out carnivore, which I think you and me agree is like a good diet to be on. Despite, so in the previous institution, you had in the 40s and 50s scientists like denouncing cholesterol as being an issue and related to heart disease.
A little bit later than that, thanks to Ansel Keys, but that's around the time that it started. Yeah.
When was it then? The 50s, 60s?
It started around that time. Yeah.
Okay. So then you had a lot of this, propaganda. So people still were suffering from being manipulated back in the day. And I think that thanks to the internet, like the internet's going to be, it's a multi-tool. It's got a lot of good and a lot of bad. You and I are able to speak because of the internet. Like, we're able to share ideas.
And I want to resolve that conflict in my mind. I do. I want to be appreciative of the positives.
Yeah, I think
the same internet and screens that are ruining my life save my life in the same way. So
yeah. I mean, like that's kind of what I mean by like things that eventually sort themselves out. I think what's going to happen is that like maybe some kind of crisis is going to occur. It could be the economic one. It could be war. It could be something else, and then people will focus on you won't have the time or the bandwidth to like fuck around. Or, I mean, a lot of people still will, but it'll focus people.
How are they going to get over their addictions if they're not homeless?
I think that I think that before that happens, it could be before that happens that like something catalyzes people to move to begin to behave differently. I think that people are not going to change until they lose their comfort, but that can come from any number of things.
So this goes back to what I said before. What is the child that grew up with a screen in their hands right out of the womb? What other reference of life do they have?
I think there's going to be some kids that watch nature stuff, and then they're going to be able to figure it out, like, or just stuff that's practical and useful to them. I do see children these days, while they do hyper-focus and play a lot of Roblox, they still have interest in the real world to the degree that they consume content related to it. Content is not going to be enough, but enough of the people that consume it. I think enough of the people that consume it will know enough about it that they can.
It's sort of like, my thought on this is, it's sort of like, I mean, I don't know how long they've been out. It's probably a lot longer than I realized, but sort of like when cigarettes first came out. What are the detriments? We think it's obvious, but like we talked about earlier, it was promoted as healthy in less than 100 years ago. The smartphone was released in 2007. It's only been 17 years. There's not enough time to really know both the physical, potential whatever it's doing to our brains and our bodies, but all of the indicators are it's really it's a serious net negative. And if the optimism is, well, as long as we don't go extinct, then everything is fine, then that's fine. I find that to be a very morbid view of reality. It's like, well, as long as there's humans, it doesn't matter, does it? It's just like, I don't think most people recognize how bad things are going to get, even in the best case scenario, to the point where if what you're saying even comes true, there will be a lot of mass suicide because people aren't going to know how to live without their. You have literally people who they do studies where if your phone fell into a ditch and you could either leave your phone and lose it, or you'd have to break your arm in order to get the phone. People can't, they try to negotiate. They try to find a way to not say, I'm going to walk away. That some people would rather break their arm than lose their phone. And you might say, well, that's not the majority. It's like, yeah, but people who are growing up into that world aren't going to. Kids talk about it all the time. Like, I can't live without my phone. And it's just like, it existed 17 years ago. Of course we can. That perspective is lost, is what I mean, is that I can't live without Netflix. Of course you can. I can't live without Twinkies. Of course you can. We've been doing this for millions of years. And now that something that's existed in less than 2 decades is as necessary as oxygen, like, that's the perspective that I'm talking about from the addiction side, which Metal Gear probably didn't realize was going to happen. And it's more a point of that most likely it's going to be worse than anything that happened in the 20th century in terms of the number of suffering and death, in terms of the literal numbers of people that are going to be affected by our desire to be social in a world that, in a system that is actually antisocial.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going to be selfish about it, it's like, what's the one thing about it? Why do I care? It's like, because I have a disordered amount of empathy according to science, and I feel that pain in everyone, and that nobody knows how many people hate talking to people anymore. How many people don't want to go to work and would rather remote work and never deal with humans in real life? And it's just, we're not evolved for this. Like the game said, it's too much power for an immature species. And I don't want to be completely negative. I want to have hope. I would feel more hopeful if I didn't feel like it's become almost impossible to not feel a sensitivity towards isolation whenever things go wrong, and wanting to take responsibility for it instead of blaming everything else.
Mm.
And I do appreciate the ability to have this conversation right now. And I am grateful for this. I'm grateful to have finally been able to talk about this cutscene from a video game with somebody I care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, likewise. Well, on that note, I mean, I think I should get going, but it was good talking to you.
Same to you.
Yeah, I can't wait for the next one. I'll be in touch with you for the next one, but yeah, I need to get going.
And we'll find something more humorous or more uplifting or more positive to talk about, or just talk about bullshit.
Yeah, or whatever. Yeah, I mean, and yeah, next time hopefully I'll be a little bit more rested. But yeah, man, I will. I'll talk to you another day.
Same to you. Thank you so much.
Have a good one, brother. Bye.
Bye, Snake.